Hello and welcome to the week that really was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 6th of June, D-Day 2025. We're heading towards summer now. Sarah, how are you?
I'm grand. We're heading towards summer, but it's been raining for a few days. Anyway, apparently it's coming back, so I live in hope.
Yes,
but
we all
I
do.
don't even. I considered whether to come onto the podcast this evening because when I was on Twitter earlier on, John, I in the words of our famous friend Clinner, I hear you're racist now, Father.
Oh, yes. This is, for those of you who don't know, Ruth Coppinger, the Socialist Party TD for Dublin West, has declared that I am, in fact, a racist. John McGurk specifically, a racist, the most racist of them all. We'll come to that. We're going to talk a little bit about that and how it arose. We're going to talk about the role of NGOs in society. We're going to ask if Micheál Martin is correct to say that the Irish people were not homogenous. You wanted to talk about dentists for some reason. We'll come to that. We're going to talk about Pride Month. We're going to talk about Robert Jenrick MP, and we're going to talk about Emmanuel Macron getting a slap from his wife, which has never happened to me. But yes, Ruth Coppinger said I was a racist. I think this is because I was on Virgin Media Television last week. I'm just moving the microphone closer because it's a bit far away. I think this is because I was on Virgin Media Television on Tuesday of this week.
And she was jealous.
I don't think she was jealous. I don't think she was jealous, but she didn't like what I said in any case. And she basically said I was a racist. And her evidence that I'm a racist is 3 tweets dating from 15 years ago. Well, one of them, the most recent one, actually dates from about 2015, 2016. It was that time. Do you remember Gerry Adams got in trouble, Sarah, for saying that the lead actor in Django Unchained, the Oscar-winning movie, was a Ballymurphy N-word? Do you remember that?
Yeah, vaguely.
Yeah. Well, at the time, I basically said, words to the effect of, I thought you really liked Nelson Mandela. The point I was making was you would never describe Nelson Mandela in those terms, so it's a bad thing to say. And apparently me saying that means I'm a racist, even though Ruth Coppinger's never had a go at Gerry Adams. The other tweet was apparently one from about 2006 where I slagged off Charlie Bird for what I thought was actually racialized commentary in relation to black babies on RTE. And the other one was where I called George W. Bush a monkey, and she mistook it for me calling Barack Obama. So entirely defamatory. But like, why she said it is sort of interests me more, because it just strikes me that if I hadn't been on television and I hadn't made arguments she didn't like, she wouldn't have called me a racist. It is just pure lashing out, shut up. If you speak out against what I believe in, we will shout you down, which everyone in this country is now familiar with. Everyone's familiar with it.
Also, don't think that it's helped in any way by the fact that it's only about a couple of weeks ago that she made a complete tit of herself on TV multiple times in her arguments back and forth with Gript.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, there's clearly some kind of deep personal resentment of our relative, and I say relative because, like, we're not on the level of the Irish Times, the Irish Independent, or RTE, but our relative success and the fact that as a media platform we're kind of here to stay and we kind of have a foothold in Irish society. And there's real resentment about that in what she's doing. And so, like, I would welcome, like, if Ruth Coppinger thinks I am wrong in anything I said on television this week, like, she is welcome to come on this podcast, and she will be given 100% equal time to make her point of view known. 100% equal time. She is welcome to challenge me to debate in any public space. We can discuss the issues. And she's welcome to use that time however she fits. If she speaks, if she wants to use it throwing personal insults and personal attacks and false and defamatory accusations, well, then that's her business. But from my point of view, I just think the discourse in this country has gotten so off-piste. I mean, all I did on television was essentially say that we've got a bunch of taxpayer NGOs who are dominating the conversation, not representing what people really think on an issue like immigration or an issue like crime. And that wasn't acceptable, even though I mean, you always have to be careful with the response you get to stuff, but the response I got was overwhelmingly positive from people. And I think, I don't know whether I represented a majority opinion or a significant minority opinion, but I will say that the views I articulated were not fringe, radical, out there views.
But also, let's just bear in mind that Ruth Coppinger speaks for a group of people who normally tiptoe around the 3 to 4 or 5% in terms of the public opinion. Would that be correct as well? So whether or not the majority or minority agree with you, this comes back to the entire issue I always have with our political discourse and how we are immature in the way we talk about things. You don't have to be the majority view to give you the right to be heard at all. Even if your view or our views or whatever are 5% or 10% and 90% of people disagree, it doesn't really matter. The point is now we obviously think, and I think we are correct, that there's a silent majority on a lot of these issues. But, at the end of the day, it's not really up to Ruth to decide what majority or minority is. And people have the right to hear alternate views debated out by smart people. And as you quite rightly point out, she doesn't have to take the same issue with the Irish Times, even though broadly speaking, you would say the Irish Times isn't in alignment with her views. Neither is RTE or whatever. But the thing is that RTE and the Irish Times give a lot of coverage to people like Ruth Coppinger, way more than the 5% or 3% public polling that they deserve. And that's probably why she could tolerate them.
Yeah, I mean, I think this business of views having public support is kind of one that you can't concern yourself with too much. I mean,
Yeah.
I obviously got a lot of very good feedback for my appearance on Virgin Media. I also got what I'd say as mixed feedback on a piece I wrote toward the tail end of last week on the war in Gaza, where I took a very particular view about the causes of that war, why it was continuing, and the Irish state's position in relation to it. And I mean, I know that the view I articulated is a minority view in the country. There's an opinion poll that confirmed that much at the weekend. But I don't think we live in a country or should live in a society where 80% of people agree with something in the opinion poll, so that's the only view that should be aired. I think it's really important.
Yeah.
It's actually even more important if you are in the 80% majority that believe something, then that's when you should be reading the opposing view more than ever, because that's when you might be wrong. I'm not saying the way that I'm right and other people are wrong on the Middle East. There are deeply held views on that. I'm making the general point in relation to views that if you're in the majority on something, that's when more than ever the minority view should be heard, because that is when you get into the realm of groupthink, which is ultimately and utterly disastrous. And to those people, and there's some of them in the comments on this podcast, and there's some of them who emailed in during the week, and there were one or two people who cancelled their subscriptions over the piece that I wrote. I would say to those people, like, we are going to at Gript give you our honest opinions. We're not going to ever say, well, the majority of readers think one thing and that isn't in accordance with what we think, so therefore we're just going to parrot what the readers want, because then you can't trust us. Like, if I came out in the morning and started writing, free Palestine from the river to the sea, everyone would know I was lying. And if I'd lie on that, I'd lie to you on everything else I believe. So I think it's really important to be honest in your views with people, whether you're in a majority, whether you're in a minority, or whatever the case may be. And I think one of the problems in general in politics, but it's happening a little bit on our side as well, Sarah, now, is that people are kind of afraid even to disagree with their own side, let alone with the majority view in the country.
Well, I mean, unfortunately for Ruth, you're just going to keep having those views and you're going to be on programs and she's just going to have to cope with it. But I also would say that, defaming people and writing tweets that are highly, highly questionable like that for somebody who's elected member of the Irish Parliament is a bit of a worry, to be perfectly honest. I would have expected a higher level of intellect from somebody who got elected to All Ireland, but I'm a kind of romantic.
You're a romantic, I'm afraid, when it comes to the intellect. Sorry, I'm not going to finish that sentence. I'm not, but like, here's the thing. The other thing is, don't take it personally, because it isn't. Okay, so she calls John McGurk a racist, but the target of that tweet isn't John McGurk. She doesn't give anything damn about me. The target of that tweet are the producers of The Tonight Show, right? What she's really saying is, you people platformed a racist, and therefore you are suspect. And what she's really saying is, if you're at home and you agree with him, you're agreeing with a racist. That's the point. The point is to strike terror into other people. Like, it's not actually about me. It could be Joe Bloggs, anyone she
Um,
doesn't agree with. It is the personal destruction of people who hold opposing views publicly, and though I flatter myself to say so vaguely articulately, those people have to be destroyed so that everyone else is a little bit afraid. It's pour encourager les autres. It is, I mean, she's a communist, and it's an old-style Maoist struggle session where people who disagreed with the regime were taken out and battered and denounced and physically beaten and tortured until they recanted their views and publicly embraced the ideals of the revolution. That's who she is. That's what her politics are. And the people of Dublin West, in their imbecility, decided to elect her, having kicked her out the
Some of her
time before, and
politics
I
is
suspect the next
also
time again.
some of her politics, as we remember, is also calling journalists pathetic when she's tweeting at 1:30 in the morning. So, she's a highbrow, highly articulate, highly deep thinking politician. And, we should be so lucky to someday reach the lofty heights of intellectual ability that she has.
I won't comment, but you always say things that are a little bit more apt than what I'm saying. Anyway, the reason I got in trouble, I think, is because I called out taxpayer-funded NGOs on the.
Oh my God! I'm surprised you weren't lynched. Go on.
It was funny, actually. The most entertaining debate in that program happened off air when they were all like the two ladies to my left were basically saying, that NGOs do a lot of good work and all the rest of it. And I said to them, in 2023 in Dublin, the Irish state spent 137 million euro funding NGOs and organizations to tackle the homelessness problem in Dublin. 137 million euro. Those organizations between them employ 1,700 people. And they're probably larger and their funding is bigger today. And in 2023, do you know what the average funding per homeless person in Dublin was, Sarah? It was 25,000 euro, and there was one employee per 3 homeless people. And like I said to them, I said, look, you're representative of this blob. How have you reduced homelessness? And the answer is homelessness has gotten worse, even though we're spending 25 grand per homeless person per year in Dublin to fix it. And we're employing 1,700 people to fix the problem across 6 different organizations, and the problem's getting worse, which suggests to me that the purpose of the funding isn't to fix homelessness, it's to give 1,700 people jobs, right? And the problem is, when you have that kind of industrial scale industry dealing with the homelessness problem, what happens to those people and their jobs if the homeless people ever get houses? Like, what happens to them? Like, it's the same problem right across the sector. And when I was talking on the airwaves about the Hope and Courage Collective, the point I was making, which I think is a reasonably fair one, is that the Hope and Courage Collective simply wouldn't exist as an organization without taxpayer funding. I was looking this evening; it has 819 followers on Twitter, but it has a whole bunch of staff. I mean, the public have no appetite for its content. It is there only because the government thinks it should be there to make political arguments on the television for debates that the government won't even attend. So, anyway, I'm hogging the conversation.
But I think that you made the point well in that, there's the audience who are watching should know that the person who is promoting, and this lady was promoting basically, the curbing of misinformation online, and that the public should be made aware of the fact that she is there promoting a pro-government a policy basically of the government when she is funded by the government. And what irks me about this conversation is coming back to my point from earlier on, which is that we just never seem to be able to have mature conversations about things. And every time the NGO conversation comes up, some wise arse comes out with, what about the GAA? Forget the GAA for a second. We'll have debates about the GAA all day long, okay? And this is what happened to you as well. I'm not talking about the NGO, the GAA. We are absolutely bursting at the seams with NGOs, with zero accountability for most of them. As you say, so many people employed, no question of accountability for results, for outcomes, for improvements in sectors, a bottom line impact like report showing what's been done, what hasn't been done, how things have been benefited. That's not to say that there aren't NGOs. Of course, there's NGOs who do good work. That's just a line that's thrown out there to end the conversation. The conversation is about, do we have too many NGOs? Do we have a proper accountability structure for our NGOs? And the answer to that is no. And do media programs like the one you were on last night, like debates on RTE, get flooded on panels with NGO people who are there promoting a certain line without being honest about their bottom line, and without being honest about the fact that if they started coming out and being absolutely hardcore against government policy, they might be in fear of losing their funding and therefore their jobs. No, we don't hear about that. And that's the point that's being made. And let's have a real conversation about NGOs, how many there are, how much they spend. As I said on the podcast before, the only NGO that's lost its funding in the last few years is the NGO that was there to oversee the spending of other NGOs. Like, and every time you bring this up, oh, the GAA. So you're saying we should get rid of the GAA? Yeah, we are. Yeah, sure. Okay. What about the amount of marches that happen and people who are paid, their job is basically to protest and carry expensive banners that are paid for by taxpayers' money, but nobody ever talks about that. Let's go to a few of them. Nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to grasp the nettle. We're childish in the way we have this conversation. And every single time it comes up, like I said, the GAA. Okay.
But I think, I'll stake out a position here. I think government funding does influence the GAA. We are coming up on an annual event that always causes a minor controversy in Ireland, where Croke Park is turned over to the Muslim part of the Muslim population of Ireland to hold its Eid al-Fatah celebration. Happens every year, and that's the National Gaelic Games Stadium of the Gaelic Athletic Organisation, which is supposed to be one of the core preservers of Irish culture and history and all the rest of it, being turned over to religion that is alien to these shores to hold a religious celebration. Do I personally have a problem with it? No, I don't. But do I think that the decision to turn it over for that purpose is influenced by the fact that the government funds the GAA and it's subject to all the kind of equality precepts of the government? Do I think that state funding has an impact on that? Yes, I do. Do I think, for example, that GAA clubs will be comfortable with their members publicly identifying themselves as GAA members at anti-immigration protests? No, I do not. I think the GAA would have a massive problem with that, and they'd invoke their law against politicizing things. Did they do that when those same members were kind of casually identifying themselves officially, non-officially, but nodding a wink with the gay marriage referendum? No, GAA didn't have a problem. I think when you take state funding, it does influence you.
Of course it does, John. Of course it does. But the GAA is a standalone institution of Ireland that is a distraction for the actual conversation we're trying to have.
True.
The conversation I'm trying to have is about NGOs. That the government funds a lot of these groups, and the other thing about it is that there's no accountability, whatever, and then there's also no alternate, and this is the issue. There's the National Women's Council of Ireland, which doesn't represent women, but where's the Council for Women of Ireland, who don't believe that men should be in women's spaces, and women who stay at home and want to build larger families and stay at home and get support in that? Where's the institution for the government-funded institution for the alternate of all the garbage lefty crap we pay for? There's none. There are so many charities and NGOs that are supporting all the right stuff, all the right people, all the people who say the thing that the government wanted to say. But there's nothing on the other side. Where's the thing for dads who don't get any support in family law matters, who lose their kids and have to live in a bedsit while they pay a mortgage? Not a lot of NGOs for those guys, because that's not popular. The things for women who want to stay at home, things for women who have trauma from having an abortion and want help. No. It's all the right stuff. And it's heavily funded, and it's on every media platform and every debate show you turn on, with nobody acknowledging it, nobody saying anything about it, and nothing for the other guys. And this is the thing about Gript. This is the raison d'etre of Gript, is that nobody was calling this out. Fine, your point is well made. The GAA, I do have an issue with the GAA being used as a religious ground for anybody, to be perfectly honest, but that's a debate for another day. What I'm talking about is NGOs, a bloated NGO sector with no accountability, and only NGOs getting funding that are the right kind of people for the right kind of people, and sweet FA for people on the other side. So we're either paying for these kind of charities on both sides of debates, or nobody gets anything. And here's the truth. It's only ever on one side. It's nothing for the alternative view. And that's what I have a major problem with. Plus the lack of accountability, plus the overspending. And just seems like we're spending a lot of people to pay people to walk around with flags over the weekend. And I think that's bullshit when we have homelessness and loads of other problems that I could name today that need attention.
But the other problem here, Sarah, is that it's become systemic. So like
Yeah.
I'm listening to you talk and I'm saying, I mean, the problem with what you're saying, I think, is that you're saying, well, it, you know, almost that it would be fine if there was a National Women's Council that actually represented it. Maybe I'm misrepresenting you, but when you say there's one for
No,
that
no,
lot
no,
and there's none for this lot, you're right. But
no. It's a
go
no.
ahead.
No, I'm saying we have too many NGOs for sure. I'm not proposing for a second to add more in. I'm just saying that not only are they cushy and whatever, but we don't have an alternate, and people don't work in those who have an alternate view. People would, we National Women's Council of Ireland have organised protests and marches where they only invite speakers of one side and all. So yes, it irks me that there's no alternate, that there's no group for women who don't agree with anything that the National Women's Council stand for, women like me. But I'm not proposing to add more. I'm just pointing out that not only is it bloated and, in my opinion, completely absurdly being overspent on, but it's also not balanced. It's not serving the
Yeah.
public in any
But
way in terms of how it's
your
contributing
example,
to a discourse.
your example is a good one because I'm not correcting you because I think you're wrong. I'm correcting you just in case people might misunderstand what you're saying. What you say is there's no taxpayer funded group, because there are obviously groups like the Countess and the Natural Women's Council, for example, who campaignn on the very issues you're talking about, but they will never get taxpayer funding because they're
Well, that's my
campaigning
point. Yeah.
against. Yeah, that's the one you're right. First of all, the field is tilted, but also this is systemic now. This is a systemic problem with the structure actually of the Irish economy, because if you defund the Hope and Courage Collective, who I, basically implicitly called to be defunded on television, I mean, that's 10 odd people who will lose their jobs. If you defund the National Women's Council, that's, 15, 20, 30 people whose employment will go. If you multiply that across, say, the homeless sector in Dublin, you get rid of all the charities and NGOs, 1,700 people lose their jobs. They have built a society where there is a massive section of society that is now directly leeching off. They're not even in the public sector, because we used to have back in the days of Bertie Ahern, you used to have this public versus private sector debate. Were the nurses doing too well at the expense of the plumbers and the plasterers and the ordinary income taxpayers? Now this third sector of the economy, which is basically the least productive set, the NGOs, they don't do anything. Like, they don't produce anything in large. And I'm not, obviously there are some of them where there's an exception, like St. John's Ambulance, right? There are some who provide services. We can fund services, sure, where it's appropriate. But organizations like the NWCI or Pave Point that represents travellers, or the Hope and Courage Collective, they don't produce, the only thing they produce are people to go on the radio and tell the public that they're wrong about stuff. And it's an industry. It's the least productive sector of the economy, and successive governments of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, by the way, both strikes, have blown it into existence. And the best bit is, this is a sector that hates them. This is a sector that cannot wait to get rid of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael out of government and get Ivana Bacik in to give them even more money. Like, it is systemically damaging to the health of our democracy in the first instance, and also it's an economic burden that the public shouldn't have to carry.
Yeah.
And these, and you go on. I mean, poor Kieran Cuddihy, he actually got very annoyed at me towards the end of the show because I kept talking about taxpayer funded stuff and this and that, and he started doing his defense of the GAA and other organizations that receive money. And of course, Virgin Media and News Talk receive taxpayer money as well. It's an endless supply of money flowing into the unproductive sector of the economy from everyone else. And he got really annoyed. But I was like, no, these people are also a constant source of guests on TV programs. So they set the agenda, because if you want to talk about, if you're a radio show with 2 hours of free time to fill, there's always a taxpayer funded NGO willing to come on and talk about the problem of racism in primary schools or whatever. So it's the media are constantly being fed this content as well, because they've got airtime to fill, and these people exist just to fill it with bullshit.
Yeah. I was listening to the radio the other day, and they were talking about the Dublin City Council proposal to put more cameras in the city centre. And, like, there was a lady on from the Irish Council for Civil Liberties talking about how more cameras would be impeding upon people's civil liberties and blah, 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 blah. And there was an amazing woman who came on who owned a small business in town who just absolutely ran ruckshot over the whole thing and was like, crime goes down when the temporary cameras get put up for big weekends, and crime and our and smashing of our front windows and crime and robbery and everything in our establishment goes down when those cameras goes, and it goes back up or whatever. And somebody in the Irish Council for Civil Liberties sitting in there is making some assessments that people won't be, and she said herself, people won't be able to really be themselves if they feel like they're on camera or whatever. Like absolute garbage, and completely at sea to the reality on the ground for people who have small businesses in the city centre who are losing footfall. City centre is much more crime ridden than it was before, having the glass in the front of their shops smashed at the weekends, etc., etc., etc. Absolutely no idea about any of that. Just somebody's, might not be able to truly be themselves and be free if they're being filmed in the public street from height. But next week, the Irish Council for Civil Liberties will be telling me about how they're going to manage speech online. It's like, you honestly couldn't make it up.
No, you couldn't. And by the way, in terms of it being a jobs program, the new head of the Irish Civil Liberties, Irish Council for Civil Liberties, is of course former Green TD and Minister Joe Bryan. So you go from, this is the other role the NGO sector provides, is to become a sort of a carousel for politicians. And not only politicians, but journalists. If you are a journalist and you're sympathetic for enough years, you'll end up with a communications job in one of these organizations that's better paid than journalism. If you're a political advisor and you help get them funding, I'm not alleging corruption in relation to any particular individual, but like, you pay enough attention to an NGO while you're the advisor to a minister, well, when the government is voted out of office, there's a nice PR job for you there too. It is the entire thing. This entire sector of the economy is a leech off everybody else, and it's a jobs program for a certain segment of people in society, and it needs to go. Lock, stock, and barrel. I don't care if 10,000 people become unemployed. They can join the rest of the real workforce like the rest of us. People might say, John McGurk, you're a leech. You run a media organization. All you do is talk for a living. Well, I like to think what we do is provide people with a service that they are free to pay for or not pay for. As I said, some people unsubscribed last week because of my views on the Middle Eastern war, which they're entitled to do. And they're entitled to subscribe if they think our journalism is worthy of support in other areas. That's providing a service for which people pay for. The NGOs do not take money from the public because the public want to support them. They take it because politicians give it to them from income taxes. Oh, anyway. We'll move on, I think, because last week I called you. I said, what did I say about you? You had the beating heart of a Fenian. And I just wondered what your little Fenian heart had to say about Micheál Martin's comments about the Irish people not being homogenous. This is in the context of a documentary that's coming out on RTE by Professor Jane Oldmeyer from Trinity College Dublin, where she says, amongst other things, that the Irish people are a race of mongrels. She's interviewed the Taoiseach, and he says the Irish people were never homogenous people. This has caused an enormous amount of controversy online. As you might imagine. I'm not sure that those comments by themselves, I should say, are a fair reflection of the totality of the documentary that she's making. I think people should generally watch things before they react to them. But nevertheless, this is a debate, and it is not disputed that the Taoiseach said that the Irish people were never a homogenous people. My colleague Matt Tracy was very annoyed by this. I was less annoyed by it, and I'm just wondering what your opinion is.
Of course Matt was upset by this. Go on, Matt. Fair play to him. He's a true Republican like myself. What do I think about this? I mean, I think that somebody, I mean, I think last week or the week before it was Fianna Fáil saying that British soldiers never killed any civilians in Ireland. Now this week it's that the Irish people were never homogenous. I mean, I don't really know what's going on there. But I think that a party that used to pride itself on its historic background and republicanism and, all of that seems to be saying strange things. And I don't know who the audience for it is, but it certainly isn't me.
I think an awful lot of this is a proxy debate, right? So I think why do you say the Irish people were never homogenous people? I mean, it's interesting because there are two definitions of homogenous in the context of the Irish people. You can say, were they racially homogenous or were they culturally homogenous? And I think there's actually a different answer to both, right? So racially homogenous, no. I mean, if we were racially homogenous, we haven't been racially homogenous since the Normans came. mean, I'm not saying the Normans came in huge numbers. Matt makes that point in his piece, but they did come, and we were no longer racially homogenous because they intermarried and they interbred, and we've had Irish people called Reynolds and Fitzgerald actually run the country since independence.
Yeah.
But the actual point is cultural homogeneity, because I don't think that this is what you would have ever called a multicultural island, say, circa 1920. Circa 1820, in fact. I mean, even given the fact that there are two traditions on the islands, that those are broadly political traditions. I mean, you know, an Ulster fry and an Irish breakfast are broadly the same thing. A lot of the cultures between a lot of the cultural, I'm not saying there aren't differences, but Unionists and Nationalists, even in the North, have a lot of shared cultural references. Culturally, this
Yeah,
has
but
always
like
been a very
food
homogenous
and
island.
things like that. Like in the Middle East, there's loads of overlap in foods and things like that. That's not. Do you know what I mean? I mean, that doesn't say anything. Culturally homogenous. I mean, you said 1920, 1940, 1950. I mean,
1980.
yeah.
I mean, I
Being
think this
honest.
was a culturally homogenous. I think the Irish people were a culturally homogenous people. Maybe Micheál Martin meant it purely in the racial sense. I don't know, but culturally we were homogenous, and now we're not, right? And although I think it's very funny. I made this point in the piece I wrote on it. Not that it was a massively popular piece or anything, but I just think I'd mentioned it on this podcast that it's funny that for all the Brits came and did this to us, the Normans came and did that to us, you know, the actual cultural takeover of America, of this country, came from the United States, and it came through the television without a shot ever being fired. We're now, you know, we've been made cultural hybrids with California, Georgia, and Illinois, and without a shot being fired. So I think it's interesting, but also then there's the immigration angle, which is this is what this debate is really about. The reason why are people angry? They're angry because Micheál Martin said we were never culturally homogenous or racially homogenous, and he's therefore justifying a load of immigration on the basis of that. That's why people are angry, right?
Mm. Well, I mean, look, you can try and justify it all you like, but I mean, I think you're alienating people. It's not true, and it's not really what people. I mean, not culturally homogenous because of because of the United Kingdom and Ireland is not the same thing as what people are talking about. And I think that they're, you know, I don't know if they're trying sometimes to troll the rage that's out there about immigration, or they're completely oblivious to it, which I think is impossible. I mean, I disagree with Micheál on a lot of things, but he's not stupid. And I think that he's got to be well aware that there's a huge amount of anger out there and that there's a problem with immigration, and that the public, according to polling, are in the 70s in terms of thinking that there's too much immigration. So to come out with a kind of a stupid statement like that is kind of patronizing, obviously going to inflame matters, and seems to be deliberately pretending that you don't understand what people are talking about. And I don't think that's going to wash with people, but I don't know.
The other thing is that, like, and with respect to Professor Ohlmeyer from Trinity, who's doing this documentary, where she said that the Irish people are mongrels, in essence. That's the phrase she's used. I know what she means. I know what she meant by using that term. She meant we're not purebred, i.e., you know, there's some of us with ancestry and blood that came from Normandy or Scandinavia or whatever. And on a purely technical level, there's an argument she made that she's correct. But like, imagine if she had turned around and said that that Irish travellers are mongrels. Imagine that she said. I mean, would RTE broadcast that documentary?
No.
I really don't think they would. I think they'd have told her to find another word. I think they'd have told her to find another word fairly sharpish. I think they would have told her to find another word if she had said it about basically any minority community. But once again, this is the sort of thing where the majority community on the island can be insulted at will, right? Can be insulted at will with no cost or consequence, because it kind of portrays you as a little bit more enlightened than everybody else. Whereas if you were to say it about some, I mean, can you imagine what do you call that lady in the Shannon who used to represent, who represents the traveling community? I mean, I would love to see what she would say if RTE produced a documentary in which the traveling people of Ireland were called mongrels. I think the reaction will be a lot different to the reaction to this documentary from the mainstream media.
Of course it would, John. But like, are you surprised?
No, I'm not surprised.
There's a whole philosophical basis to that they think that you can't really be racist against X. You can't you can't punch down or punch up, and so as a white male, you can be safe in your knowledge tonight when you put your head down in your bed that you will never ever be able to be the victim of any kind of you know racism
But
or anything, because it's impossible.
but that works both ways. It's not just you can say whatever you want about white Irish people, for example. It also means you can't say things that are observably true about other groups. And I'll stick because I mentioned them with travelers, but like Irish travelers have significantly higher rates of committing crime, significantly lower rates of education, significant cultural issues of feuding. And it's almost anathema to mention those things without also giving a lengthy speech about deprivation, which is ironically caused by those very cultural things that we're not so like the attitude is you can't say things that are true about some groups, but you can say things that are arguably untrue about others. It's a bizarre kind of censorious culture in which we live, in my view. But then again, I am a racist, as Deputy Coppinger said.
Deputy Coppinger.
We are halfway through the podcast, so you wanted to shout at somebody in the comments. Was that it? There was somebody in the comments last week said something that really annoyed Sarah.
Okay, really annoyed is a bit of a... Okay. We were talking last week. By the way, after a lot of people asking us to, for a while, we were talking last week about the cost of living, and then I'm getting given out to in the comments saying that I shouldn't be talking about the cost of living because it was like watching P. Flynn because my husband is a dentist and the price of dentistry in this country. First of all, I don't think that political commentary should only be done on anything by people who are, so by that rationale, we'll never talk about housing again because both of us are house owners with mortgages. But second of all, this person doesn't know anything about my financial situation. And third of all, dentistry in Ireland is partially really expensive because the government ignore dentistry, don't offer any kind of public service towards dentistry, think that it's not like a secondary medical situation, and that's why people find it really hard to find a dentist, etc., etc., etc. So if you have an issue with the cost of dentistry in Ireland, maybe get out of the comments on our podcast and start contacting your TD. But yeah,
also dentists are evil. It's well known.
Yeah, I know. They are.
I've often said I have not been to the dentist since I was 8 years old. No, I haven't been.
I know. And doesn't my husband give out to you?
He does, but like he's a dentist, so he can't be trusted.
Nobody likes the dentist. It's a part of, and you're also getting on now. You're in your 40s. You need to start taking it seriously. No, but it's more the wider picture.
Teeth regularly, at least once a week.
Good boy. No, it's more the wider picture. It's just such a base point. Like, you know what I mean? You shouldn't be commenting on something, or like, sometimes I just find the kind of, we're talking about the cost of living in Ireland. It's an issue that massively affects a lot of people. It's an issue that massively affects a lot of people who listen to this podcast. The cost of living and the cost of raising children in Ireland is massively going up. I was pointing out that my childcare bill per month is about €2,000. I don't know a lot of people, regardless of what their salary is, who can take a €2,000 a month bill without having a massive consequence on their finances. But that's besides the point. Loads of people are struggling. It's a massive issue for some people. And you talk about it and get snarky comments from some arsehole who wants to talk about my husband being a dentist. Like, sorry, piss off.
I'm on your side, but I was very tempted at the end there to go, it ain't easy. Try it sometime. But I didn't. Because in fairness, Sarah is right. It is very difficult for lots of people. And I was talking to somebody this weekend who is genuinely a high earner. And when I say a high earner, I mean up there in the six figures. Not six figures starting with one. Put it that way.
Yeah.
And one income household, bunch of kids, and between tax and everything else. I'm not saying that they are badly off. I'm not saying they're struggling. I'm not saying they're about to become homeless. I'm saying that they reached out to me because the podcast struck a nerve with them, saying that, they basically have no money left over after they do all the things that they do. Now, some of them are things, obviously, people on lower incomes don't do. I'm not disputing that. I'm saying that there are people out there who, with a lot more money than you would think, that would be having a really comfortable life, who aren't having a really comfortable life because of the increase in costs in things. And for some people, that is stuff that isn't relevant to everybody else, right? That I'm not saying that's not everyone's kids do various activities or whatever. I'm not saying that,
Yeah.
and don't take it the wrong way. I'm just saying there are people out there who are struggling and having to cut back that you wouldn't think would be struggling and having to cut back in this economy.
But that's
all
my
I'm saying.
point, is that you have a conversation about the cost of living because the cost of living is affecting people across a wide spectrum of financial situations, from the 27-year-old single guy who lives with his parents because he can't afford rent, to the 57-year-old banker who's on 300 grand a year, who's still struggling because after he pays tax and pays for everything, he's suddenly got way less money than he used to because he's paying for he has a huge amount of outgoes, and all the people in between. That's the point of the conversation. Do you know what I mean? Not,
Yeah, the other thing is,
you're not allowed to talk about this unless you're kind of about to be homeless yourself. I mean, that's a nonsensical argument to make. And as I said, commenting on me or you or whoever not being in a position to talk about somebody, like, people don't know anybody's financial situation. So, but I just think,
I think one of the things in this country that's really unhelpful when it comes to incomes and all that sort of stuff is that everyone talks about income in gross terms. You know, TD earns 100 grand a year. Well, yeah, it doesn't see literally half of it. You know, approximate take home pay. I'm not saying this is a bad salary. I am not saying this is a bad salary. Do not shout at me. But approximate take home pay, 55, 56 maybe. Which is I'm not saying that's a bad salary. I'm saying though that it's, you know, people think of it as more than it is, because the amount of tax people pay, particularly once they go up the income levels, is enormous. Anyway, we'll move on before I get myself in trouble, because I do not earn 100 grand a year or anything close to it in this job. So don't shout at me. Pride Month. Laura Perrins wrote a piece for Gript this week, which was what I call a surprise hit, in which she basically said, we've had enough of this Pride Month now. You can have your Pride Parade, but, like, you know, Pride Month is taking the piss. Do you think she's right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to remember where I really don't care about, have your parade and whatever. I don't care, like, good for you. But I thought it was, my understanding of it was that people wanted to be free to get married and live their life the way they wanted and be who they are and be, out and whatever about it. And so do that. And is it not? I mean, I saw a thing the other day saying that there's, like, rising homophobia in Ireland. I don't see that at all. And I'm sorry, but I just don't. And obviously I'm not gay, but I still think I live in this society and I observe this society and I observe people and the way they interact and the way they talk about people. And I just don't see it. I think Pride Month, good for you. Pride Month, great. But I just think, get on with it. Like, I note that I saw a thing the other day that a lot of the companies, the major, big companies, global companies, were all changing their logos to the rainbow flag other years, and that this year is the first year that it seems to be stopping. What that means, I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, I think Laura is right. I mean, I think that, again, I thought that the idea was going to be ultimately that nobody cares if you're gay. So be who you are, get on with it. That's fine. And it feels still like we're all supposed to continuously participate in something that we don't participate for anybody else.
What bothers me, I have to say, is the flag. I look, I genuinely consider myself a liberal in some respects. Those respects would be that I try not to get annoyed about things that don't impact on me.
Same.
So if
that's what
local
I'm saying.
branch,
it's like, have the parade, do whatever. I don't care. Like, it's nothing to do with me. Like, whatever. If somebody was saying something really horrible and homophobic to somebody in my presence, I would challenge them on it. But, like, that doesn't happen. And I don't know.
When I was growing up, the 12th of July was the big marching day in Northern Ireland, right? And all the lads would get out in their bowler hats and their sashes and they'd march around. They'd play a few tunes, and sometimes they'd fight the nationalists and sometimes they wouldn't. And, everyone would call it a family day out, and then other people would call it a sectarian thing. And it was the 12th of July, right? Except it's not in the north, because marching season now is a thing, Right? It starts at one end of the summer, it ends at the other end of the summer, and somebody's always marching somewhere up there, right? And you start to get the impression, lads, everyone's entitled to their day.
Mm.
And it doesn't really bother me. And I don't think it would, I'll get in trouble for this. I don't think it would particularly bother me in North as somebody who can't become a member of the Orange Order because I'm a Roman Catholic. If they were holding a parade 2 times over, it wouldn't bother me. Do your thing. But what bugs me is the way the pride flag is kind of adopted as the alternative national flag. It's on buses. It's. I mean, I was in the Dáil. The last time I was in the Dáil was about, because I don't go. I mean, I could go, but I don't go. Send Ben to do that stuff. But the last time I was in there was about 2 years ago, and it was in like December. And on the wall, on one of the walls inside LH2000, I don't know if it's still there. I assume it is. Literally, one of the walls was painted in the rainbow flag. I'm like, this is the national parliament. And you would think it was the parliament of Gay Standia or somewhere like that. It was bizarre. And I kind of feel if there's a rise in homophobia, it is that people are kind of sick of it just being everywhere all the time. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, nobody cares if you're gay. Nobody. I mean, if they're having a pride parade on next Saturday in my local town, I'd say go have your nice day out. I don't mind.
Yeah.
But it's
Why
the
would you?
constancy of it everywhere. Like, and it really is. And one of the things that's interesting about Laura's piece, I thought, was that she pointed out something which kind of we don't talk about enough, which is that pride is one of the 7 deadly sins. And I think that's kind of
Mm.
at the heart of it. It's not kind of like gay people are here. It's gay. It's you know, you will see who we are because we are gay. In a way that, you know, as she said, you don't celebrate pride really in any other context. It's a strange. It's just. I think it would serve everybody well if there was just a gay pride parade in Dublin in the summer for everyone to have their day out and move on with it, instead of it being shunted into schools, into workplaces, into everywhere has to have their rainbow cookies. I think a lot of people are just quietly sick of it. That's what I think. There, I
Yeah.
said it.
We'll find out in the comments, John.
And the comments will all agree with me on this stuff. It's when I start saying that, like, I'm kind of sick of Donald Trump sending stupid tweets. That's when the comments don't agree with me. They'll all agree with me on that one. I think there's no fear of that. But yeah, I do think they'll agree with me because it's a position a lot of people hold, and a position that it's one of those things that you're never going to hear said in the rest of the media. It's just one of those things that, like, with respect to the very fine people at the various, you know, radio programs, they're not going to stick their neck out and be accused of homophobia for saying that they don't think gay pride should last a whole month. Just not.
Fair
I
enough.
wouldn't in their view. I probably wouldn't. I would think if my income depended on it, if I was working in, say, News Talker Today FM and I held that opinion as a broadcaster, would I honestly have the courage to say it? I'd like to think I would, but I probably wouldn't, because it's not an important enough issue to lose your job over when there's more important things. But I can say it because I'm the editor and no one's going to sack me.
And also, yeah, and also that, well, if you did lose your job in News Talk for saying something like that, the other thing is that because there's about 19 NGOs covering the alternate view, there wouldn't be one to give you a parachute for you to parachute into a new job. So you'd have to be careful.
That is true. I just had this terrible vision there when I said I'm the editor, no one's going to sack me, of you opening next week's podcast. As you all know, John issued a statement on Monday apologizing for his previous conduct or whatever. But I hope that isn't what happens. I hope pride didn't come before a fall in my case. Let's finish up by talking about something that kind of happened before last week's podcast, but we didn't get to talk about it, but we kind of should talk about it because I think it's interesting. We always talk about cultural things. Have you ever administered to your dentist husband the kind of smack across the face that the First Lady of France administered to her husband?
No. Kind of come from the baseline view, I'm a traditionalist, that when you're in a relationship with somebody else, you just shouldn't put your hands on them in that way ever.
Yeah. Mrs. McGurk, in fairness, has been given much cause over the years to throw things at my head or engage in. Honestly, there are times when I think she'd be justified, because, like, I'm not always the easiest person to live with, I guess.
I agree with I agree with that. There's definitely times she's could be justified. But no, the point is that it's remarkable how quickly that news story blew out. And I mean, I'm tooting or, beating the same old drum, but I have to say it that if that had been Donald Trump putting his hand on Melania like that, or any man to a woman, they would not. It would not have been a 2-day news cycle, and they would have not been able to just dismiss it in the way in which they were able to dismiss it. You just shouldn't be putting your hands on somebody like that. They're garbage. Saying that they were messing around together. I mean, his face said it all. When he turns to the camera and realizes the door is open, his face said it all. They were not messing around. It did not appear to me to be a light-hearted interaction between a couple. And there's something obviously not right going on there. And I just think that it's just another demonstration of the hypocrisy, because I just think if it was the other way around, we would be having a very different conversation. Like, it's not a laughing matter for a woman to be, assaulting or hitting her husband. But we take it way less seriously than we do if it's the other way around.
But it's also, see, the slap actually I think is the least bothersome thing about all of that, because what strikes me is how the media kind of evade the weirdness and creepiness of that relationship. And
Yep.
lest I be accused of commenting on somebody else's marriage, let me just paint you a picture. Imagine that I'm 41, right? So imagine that 2 years ago when I was 39, I had been a teacher in a school and I had encountered a 15-year-old girl. And I had decided to leave my wife for the 15-year-old and commence a relationship with her that later ended up in marriage. What would people think of me, or indeed any man in my position? I do not think
Not
it would be
much.
positive. Not much.
No.
No. It will be assumed. I think I will be called, first of all, a pederast or a paedophile. Pederast, I think, is the more technically accurate term in that.
Yeah.
In that specific situation, a groomer, an exploiter. This is what happened in the Macron marriage. She was his teacher when he was 15. She says they fell in love, and he's been with her ever since. Now, I'm sure that there's elements of truth to that, but I also think a relationship that begins with that kind of power differential and that power dynamic. I mean, presumably she was the sole source of income for a long time, right? Because she's the one with earning power while he's a 16 or 17 or 18-year-old young man. There's also, there's a powerful, I think there's lots of issues there in that marriage that simply do not get discussed. And I think if he was the 74-year-old and she was the 50 or 49-year-old, whatever it is, and he was punching her and that was the backstory, I think there would be enormous focus on him. I think a lot of the stuff about Brigitte Macron that is out there online, particularly the crazy shit that's being perpetrated by people like Candace Owens, alleging that this woman who has 2 adult sons, one of them the same age as her husband, is a man. I think that is just nonsense, and I think it misses the bigger point, which is that there's this is at minimum a serious case of kind of like double standards. That's what I think.
And also just, I mean, no question about, is he okay? I mean, if we saw a glimpse into something, is anybody interested in knowing, how do we know that this man isn't a victim of a serious domestic violence situation? Does anybody care?
Yeah, or let's even step back from domestic violence. Let's talk about things that will be talked about in the other situation. The coercive control, is that mentioned?
Yeah.
Because this is President Macron of France is not just any politician. He is, aside from being president of France and co-prince of Andorra, which is a title that the French president gets, he is also the controller of the world's 4th largest nuclear arsenal after the United States, Russia, and China. A man with the power to obliterate a significant portion of the planet with an order from his desk. He is one of the most important geopolitical figures in the world. He controls one of the largest economies in Europe. And I think there are legitimate questions to ask about his private life, and from a sympathetic to him point of view, because I just think the situation is so abnormal that if the genders were reversed, no one would have a hesitation in calling it abnormal. But
Yeah.
here we are.
But he's also a human being, like somebody's child, not her child, obviously, but could be. But like he's somebody's child. He's a human being, and he could be in a dangerous situation. And if the roles were reversed, as you say, that people would be talking about that. Women on talk shows would be talking about, what situation he may or may not be in if he was a woman. And because he's a man, it's just kind of dismissed, like it's fine. But I have a big problem with that. I mean, domestic violence against men is not an uncommon thing. It exists. It happens. Just because it's not, hundreds and hundreds of NGOs to cover it in Ireland doesn't mean it's not a real thing. And it has its own complex, psychological trauma for men because they feel emasculated, and all kinds of horror shows for people, and really seriously damages men for a long time and isolates them and whatever. How do we know that there's not something like that going on here? We don't. But the thing is, hopefully not, but nobody cares enough to investigate or talk about it because he's not the right gender.
Yeah, well, my question is beyond that, which I think is a legitimate question. Who's actually making the decisions about what happens in France? I think it's a fair question. The other thing, just before we finish, is that, like, if you meet somebody when you're 15 and you start a relationship, like, I remember being 15. Didn't have any relationships when I was 15.
No.
Probably desired one or two, I'd imagine, but
Certainly didn't have one with a 40-year-old.
Certainly didn't have one with a 40-year-old. But even I remember my first girlfriend is a wonderful person, and we were sort of like broke up when I was 19 or whatever, and it was all very sad and tragic and all the rest of it. But you are not the same person at 15 that you are at 39. And one of the ways you grow up in life is by having different relationships. If you've been in the same relationship with a woman who's been that much your senior and that much of an influence on you in that period of your life, I don't really think you've had a normal sort of developmental course as an adult. I think that's why we'd be so horrified if the shoe was on the other foot. You'd say things like, "This is all she knew. He kept her under his thumb. She hasn't had the opportunity even to discover who she is. This person has groomed this girl for years." That's what would be said. And yet, when in this case, it's kind of like, it's almost that kind of thing that you find where you occasionally in America you get the story, of the female teacher, the hot teacher, the female teacher in her late 20s or 30s who's been having sex with the students, and the attitude is always kind of like, "Oh, I wish I had a teacher like that." Yeah. Whereas if he was a male teacher having sex with the female students, he's a monster. That kind of double standard, I think it can be funny in those cases where, Saturday Night Live did an absolutely hilarious sketch. I don't know if you ever saw it with the young student and the teacher on trial, and he was basically saying, "What did you say? How did everyone find out about this?" And he's like, "I told them." And what did you say happened? It was like, "It was wonderful," and it's very funny. But we do make a joke out of it. But I think it's not even about that. It's about the influence this person has on you from the age of 15 through to the age of 30, right? You're just under this older person's thumb all the time.
But you're also coming at it only, if you think about it, like that's one perspective. That's the perspective from his point of view. But also from the other point of view, I'm 41. And I think any woman listening to this podcast would think, if she's, 35 to 45 or older, think about herself at 39, 40. A 15-year-old boy is a child to you. I'm married to someone who's 10 years older than me, and I find him childish. So like a 15-year-old shouldn't even, what does it say about you that in terms of a potential sexual relationship, that a 15-year-old boy is even on your radar? That you're even, and you're in a power dynamic that you're their teacher. There's a real questions of judgment and character and morality and all kinds of other things there as well. Why would it even come into your kind of thought process to think about a 15-year-old boy in that way? Bizarre.
Well, there's nothing I disagree with there, so I think we'll wrap it up for another week. Unless you have anything else that you wanted to say that we didn't cover. That wasn't a prompt, by the way. It was a genuine question.
No, not
Sometimes
for
I'm
this
like,
week.
"Sarah, did you have something to say?" And she's got a thing that we're supposed to talk about that she hasn't mentioned, but that's not the case here.
No.
All right. Well, it's been an interesting week. We learned that I am a racist. Funny, I have nothing against the Greeks at all. As So maybe I'll get into that. Maybe I'll get into that. I'll ask Graham Linehan for tips on how to be a better one, to really impress Ruth Coppinger. But other than that, that was the week that really was. I've been John. She's been Sarah. We'll see you next week. Have a great weekend.